What on God's green earth was I doing here? Why was I doing this? Why was I beating myself up?
Sally Field's challenging experiences with male co-stars. Throughout her remarkable career, Sally Field has worked alongside some of Hollywood's biggest names. While audiences saw chemistry and magic on screen, the reality behind the cameras was often very different. Field has been open about her difficult experiences with several prominent male actors, revealing stories of manipulation, dismissiveness, and professional challenges that shaped her journey in Hollywood. Burt Reynolds. A toxic romance. Sally Field's most well-documented, difficult relationship was with Burt Reynolds, both personally and professionally. The two were considered a Hollywood power couple during their 5-year relationship, appearing together in films like Smokey and the Bandit, The End, and Hooper. To the public, they seemed perfect together. He was the rugged, mustached sex symbol, and she was the fresh-faced girl next door with undeniable chemistry on screen. However, the reality of their relationship was far more complicated and damaging than fans could have imagined. In her honest memoir, In Pieces, Field revealed that Reynolds was emotionally manipulative and controlling behind closed doors. While he presented himself as charming and charismatic to the outside world, privately he was dismissive and obsessed with maintaining power in their relationship. Reynolds consistently undermined Field's confidence in subtle but calculated ways. He questioned her instincts, mocked her sensitivity, and made her feel like she had to make herself smaller to keep peace in their relationship. When she expressed creative ideas or took pride in her work, he would belittle her accomplishments or show complete disinterest. This constant criticism caused Field to internalize his negativity and doubt her own voice and talents. Perhaps most shocking was Reynolds' attempt to sabotage Field's career. She was offered the role of Norma Ray, the challenging dramatic part that would eventually win her an Academy Award. Reynolds actively discouraged her from taking it. He wanted her to stick with lighter, less serious roles that wouldn't challenge his dominance or potentially outshine him. Field admitted that his disapproval made her doubt herself so much that she almost turned down this career-defining opportunity. Reynolds wanted control not just over Field personally, but over how others perceived her. He pressured her to look, act, and speak in ways that wouldn't intimidate or challenge him. Even during public appearances, Field felt like she was performing a version of herself that aligned with his comfort, rather than expressing her true personality. The relationship made Field feel invisible, as if her worth was measured only by how well she could orbit around his star power. She wrote in her memoir, "He sucked the life out of me," a line that deeply affected fans who had admired their seemingly perfect relationship. Despite loving him deeply, Field later recognized that the relationship had been toxic, damaging, and rooted in a power imbalance that she was too young and vulnerable to recognize at the time. Ironically, Reynolds later admitted in interviews that he regretted not marrying Field. But by then, she had already found her voice and was done playing small for any man, regardless of how famous he was. Her strength in walking away and speaking her truth has become a powerful example of reclaiming one's identity after emotional abuse, especially in an industry that often favors silence over speaking out. Tommy Lee Jones. The cold co-star. Field's experience working with Tommy Lee Jones on Lincoln was particularly disappointing given the prestige of the project. Field poured her heart and soul into portraying Mary Todd Lincoln, a complex and fragile woman, living in the shadows of power and personal tragedy. However, while she gave everything to her role, Jones gave her nothing in return. From the very start of production, Field noticed Jones's cold and detached behavior. While the rest of the cast, including Daniel Day-Lewis, brought a collaborative spirit to the set, Jones showed up as if he was doing everyone a favor. Off-camera, he barely acknowledged Field's presence, offering no small talk, camaraderie, or even basic courtesy. Field later hinted in interviews that working with him felt like acting opposite a wall. A Wall with a Grudge. Field is known for building chemistry with her co-stars and developing emotional rapport to make her performances authentic. But Jones shut that door entirely, creating an isolating and suffocating environment. He wouldn't rehearse, wouldn't engage, and when the cameras stopped rolling, he would retreat into his own world, making it clear that Field wasn't welcome in it. His behavior wasn't just cold, it was dismissive and bordered on condescending. Crew members reportedly noticed the tension, and while Field kept things professional, those close to the production could sense that Jones's attitude had a chilling effect on the entire set dynamic. He acted like collaboration was beneath him, especially with her. What made matters worse was that Jones's aloofness seemed targeted. While he had a reputation for being gruff with everyone, Field felt his arrogance was more personal. As a seasoned actress and two-time Oscar winner, she came into the role prepared, passionate, and ready to dive deep. But Jones met that energy with indifference. No eye contact, no connection. Just grunts, mumbled lines, and silence. Jones never offered encouragement or acknowledged Field's work, even when she was delivering emotionally wrenching scenes. His presence made scenes heavier not because of dramatic tension, but because of the emotional void he created. Field felt like she was doing all the emotional lifting alone, acting through a vacuum of cold stares and disengagement. For someone like Field, who thrives on emotional truth and human connection, it was a nightmare. She later referred to the experience as one of the coldest and most disappointing of her career. Despite her respect for Jones' talent, his lack of basic human decency made the experience deeply disheartening. James Garner. Creative differences. Field's experience with James Garner during Murphy's Romance presented a different type of challenge. Their on-screen chemistry felt sweet, genuine, and effortless, creating movie magic that made audiences fall in love with both characters. However, behind the camera, things weren't nearly as warm and romantic. At first glance, they seemed like the perfect pairing. Garner was the laid-back veteran of both television and film, while Field was the earnest, emotionally driven actress at the height of her career. But their working styles clashed almost immediately. Field, ever the perfectionist, dove deep into her character. She was meticulous with her script analysis, always examining subtext, pushing for emotional truth, and asking questions that Garner found unnecessary and irritating. Garner came from the old school of acting. He preferred things simple, straightforward, and fast. Rehearsals weren't his thing. He was known for relying on charm and instinct rather than extensive preparation. While this approach worked for him, it grated on Field. She needed connection, nuance, and mutual respect, not someone rolling their eyes when she asked for another take. The tension didn't erupt into open conflict, but it hung in the air like static electricity. Field later described it as a working relationship full of unspoken resentment. There was no yelling or dramatic confrontations, just two people quietly realizing they weren't on the same page, and maybe never would be. Field felt isty, while Garner felt slowed down. Their interactions remained professional but were far from friendly. Garner's indifference affected the entire tone of the set. Crew members reportedly noticed that the two stars rarely spoke when the cameras weren't rolling. While Garner maintained his reputation as an affable leading man, Field felt a subtle chill every day, as if her passion and preparation were met not with collaboration, but with passive resistance. Field later reflected that part of the discomfort came from fundamental differences in how they viewed their craft. For her, acting was excavation, emotional, raw, and demanding. For Garner, it was a job that he did well, but with a practical, almost detached mindset. Their philosophies didn't just misalign, they clashed in quiet but persistent ways that made every scene more difficult than it appeared. In the end, the film was successful, and audiences never saw the disconnect. They witnessed warmth, playfulness, and believable romance, which was a testament to both actors' professionalism. But for Field, Murphy's romance, Dawson, was a bittersweet experience that proved even the best on-screen love stories can hide the coldest off-screen realities. Robin Williams, Surviving the Storm. Everyone loved Robin Williams for his brilliance, energy, and whirlwind mind that never stopped spinning. But according to Field, all that genius came with a significant cost: her sanity during the filming of Mrs. Doubtfire. Initially, Field was thrilled to work with Williams. He was already a legend, a fast-talking, lovable comedian with an uncanny ability to switch between slapstick comedy and deep emotion. However, once production began, the challenges became apparent. Williams wasn't just high energy, he was uncontainable. On set, he would improvise entire scenes, shift tones mid-line, and throw out new jokes with every take. The result was controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. For Field, who came from a classically trained, shinily grounded school of acting, the experience was draining. While she respected Williams's genius, and always made that clear, she later confessed that working alongside him felt like being caught in a tornado. She described it as trying to grab air. Every scene became a battle to hold on to her character, rhythm, and presence. Field wasn't trying to compete with Williams, she was simply trying to survive him. He dominated the space so completely that Field often felt like a prop in her own scenes. At times, she had to ask the director for clearer structure, just so she could deliver her lines without being steamrolled by Williams's constant improvisation. His freewheeling comedy was exhilarating to watch, but maddening to play against when trying to preserve emotional continuity. While Field never publicly lashed out, her exhaustion was no secret to those on set. Between takes, she was reportedly quiet and focused, trying to center herself amid the madness. In private, Field described feeling like she had to fight for oxygen just to be seen and heard in scenes. It wasn't personal. She knew Williams wasn't trying to overshadow her maliciously, but his non-stop comedic barrage left little room for anyone else to breathe. The emotional depth she brought to the role, which was the heart of Mrs. Doubtfire, was constantly at risk of being drowned out by the noise. Field carried the weight of the story's pain and realism, grounding the movie in authenticity, while Williams bounced from joke to joke like a man possessed. Despite their on-screen chemistry and her deep respect for his talent, working with Williams left Field mentally and emotionally worn out. The film became a comedy classic for fans, but for her it was a circus she barely survived. Jeff Bridges, artistic incompatibility. During the filming of Kiss Me Goodbye, Field hoped for a light-hearted romantic comedy experience. Instead, she found herself dealing with a frustrating clash of work ethics and personalities while starring opposite Jeff Bridges. Field came to the project with intense preparation, having studied the script meticulously and mapped out the emotional beats of her character. She was ready to approach each scene with focus and sincerity. Bridges, however, was in a completely different headspace. From the beginning, he treated the set like a playground. While Field was diving deep into character development, Bridges was cracking jokes, going off script, and improvising wildly, sometimes to the point of derailing entire scenes. Initially, Field tried to go with the flow. After all, Bridges was known for his laid-back, free-spirited style, and his charm was undeniable. But as the days wore on, his looseness began to feel less like charm and more like chaos. Scenes she had spent days mentally preparing for were treated like casual run-throughs by Bridges. Field later confessed in interviews that she found the experience deeply frustrating and unrewarding. She felt her commitment was being undermined by someone who didn't take the work as seriously, or at least not in the way she did. The imbalance created a wall between them. While they appeared friendly on camera, off-camera there was little warmth and even less connection. Field felt like her emotional labor and the long hours spent crafting subtle performances were being ignored. Instead of being uplifted by her co-star, She was constantly having to recalibrate, adjust, and sometimes simply hold scenes together while Bridges operated in his own world. Her intensity was met not with respect, but with indifference, which made her feel increasingly isolated. The tone of the set beges, and to reflect this disconnect, crew members noticed the underlying tension, not overt hostility, but an unmistakable sense that the leads were operating on entirely different frequencies. Field's need for emotional truth was constantly battling Bridges' improvisational looseness, making the creative process feel more like a tug of war than a collaboration. For an actress as disciplined and emotionally attuned as Field, the experience was exhausting. What should have been a fun romantic project became a draining exercise in patience, and another reminder that not every co-star is built for collaboration. Marlon Brando, a disturbing encounter. Field and Marlon Brando never actually worked together on a film, but even one meeting was enough to leave her completely disillusioned and deeply disturbed. At the time, Field was already a rising star, respected in the industry for her emotional intelligence and professional integrity. When an opportunity arose to potentially work with Brando, it seemed like a huge moment. For many actors, just sitting across from the legendary star of A Streetcar Named Desire and The Godfather would have been a dream come true. But what unfolded in that meeting was far from legendary. It was downright uncomfortable. According to Field, Brando entered the room with an ego that seemed to arrive before he did. From the moment they sat down, it became clear that he had no interest in hearing what she had to say. He talked over her constantly, brushed off her questions, and treated her less like a potential creative partner and more like someone there to stroke his ego. Then the inappropriate behavior began. Brando started flirting in what Field would later describe as a disturbingly predatory manner. He made innuendos, commented on her appearance, and acted as if she should be flattered by his attention. She wasn't. She was disgusted. What? Tea should have been a conversation about craft and collaboration, turned into a power play that left her shaken. Field walked away from the meeting with absolute clarity. There was no way she was going to work with this man. No matter how iconic his legacy was, she knew instinctively that sharing a set with Brando would have been a nightmare. He didn't view her as an equal, or even seem to view her as a person. Just another woman to conquer, another object to control. The experience felt less like a professional opportunity and more like a warning. What could have been a career-defining collaboration turned into a firm line in the sand. Field never spoke publicly about the exact project they had discussed, but what she made clear was that the meeting left a lasting negative impression. It was a rare instance where walking away didn't feel like a missed opportunity, it felt like an escape. For Field, even a brief encounter with Brando was more than enough. Her decision to trust her instincts and say no to the wrong energy, regardless of fame, became part of her quiet legacy of self-respect and boundaries. Paul Newman. Invisible in plain sight. Even the legendary Paul Newman didn't make the best impression on Field. When they starred together in Absence of Malice, audiences saw a captivating pairing, the iconic blue-eyed leading man and the rising star with undeniable presence. But behind the scenes, Field was left feeling something she never expected while working with one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. Invisible. By that point, Newman was a Hollywood giant whose name alone commanded reverence. His quiet, confident demeanor gave him an almost untouchable aura. But what looked like grace on camera felt like domination on set. Field later revealed that Newman often made key creative decisions without consulting her, choices about tone, timing, and delivery that affected both of their performances. While it wasn't hostile, it was dismissive. Field wasn't asked or include. Dead. She was expected to adapt, not collaborate. For someone still solidifying her place in Hollywood and desperate to be taken seriously, this treatment was more than frustrating. It was emotionally crushing. Field came into the project hoping to learn, grow, and be seen as a creative equal. Instead, She found herself sidelined by an actor so accustomed to commanding space that he didn't even notice the air he was taking up. There was no shouting or overt dismissal. Newman wasn't cruel or even unkind. But sometimes silence can be just as loud as shouting. The lack of acknowledgement and shared creative dialogue contributed to a feeling of profound isolation. Field later reflected on the experience as one of quiet disappointment, saying she felt erased in scenes not because she wasn't giving her all, but because she was being quietly overshadowed by a man who didn't think to include her in the process. It was a harsh lesson in power dynamics. Being in a room with greatness doesn't guarantee you'll be heard. For Field, it was a heartbreaking realization that even the nicest man in Hollywood could still make you feel small without ever raising his voice. Absence of malice may have added another prestigious credit to her name, but it came at the cost of feeling like a supporting player in her own story. She learned that in a business filled with towering egos and subtle exclusion, being brilliant wasn't enough. She also had to fight every day just to be treated like she mattered. Sally Field's experiences with these prominent male actors reveal the complex challenges that women have faced in Hollywood for decades. While she dazzled audiences on screen, behind that success was a woman constantly pushing through disrespect, manipulation, and toxic behavior. These 7 men might be legends in their own right, but for Field, they represented some of the hardest arts of her job. Her willingness to speak openly about these experiences has helped shed light on the power dynamics and gender imbalances that have long existed in the entertainment industry. Field's story serves as both a testament to her resilience and a reminder of the importance of treating all colleagues with respect and professionalism, regardless of their status in the industry hierarchy.